The CAC Boomerang was a low-wing, single-engine, single-seat fighter aircraft of all-metal construction. Directly descended from the Wirraway trainer general-purpose aircraft, it was often referred to as a panic fighter, as the Boomerang was hurriedly approved and built, ostensibly to give Australia self-reliance in fighter aircraft manufacture. Designed and produced by the Australian Commonwealth Aircraft Corporation, a total of 250 were built and used exclusively with the Royal Australian Air Force from 1943 to 1945 in the Southwest Pacific Theatre of World War II. While designed to fulfill the fighter-interceptor role, it had only fleeting, unsuccessful contact with enemy aircraft. However, the Boomerang found its true niche as an Army cooperation aircraft, and the type gave very useful service in New Guinea and Bougainville. To understand the rush to production of the Boomerang, one needs to understand the plight of the RAAF at the outbreak of war in the Pacific in December 1941. Following the Arcadia Conference immediately after the Japanese surprise attacks, the Germany First strategy was agreed upon by the Allied leaders. This meant that the bulk of Allied resources, including troops, weapons, and other supplies, were directed towards defeating Nazi Germany before focusing on the Pacific. Seemingly, compared to defeating Germany, defending Australia from Japan was of little importance to Britain. While the Australian government was unaware of the Allied leaders' agreement prompted by Britain, tension was nevertheless rising between the two formerly stalwart friends. Australian Prime Minister John Curtin, in his New Year's message delivered on the radio on the 26th of December 1941 and published in the Melbourne Herald the next day, announced that, "Without any inhibitions of any kind, I make it quite clear that Australia looks to America, free of any pangs as to our traditional links or kinship with the United Kingdom." But alas, the US, Australia's now preferred option for alliance, had its own issues with supply of modern fighter aircraft. The Japanese synchronous attacks on Pearl Harbor and the Philippines not only placed a large dent in the number of US aircraft in the Pacific, but highlighted the need for the US to re-equip its pilots with improved aircraft. US industrial might and innovation turned inwards, determined to strengthen its own Pacific capabilities as well as defeat Nazi Germany. So despite having a large order of Curtiss P-40 Warhawks placed with the Americans, these constraints, along with the perceived risk of losses, both of planes and parts, in transit across oceans, had Australia look inwards for the capacity to develop its own fighter aircraft capability. Fortunately, the concern about the infant nature of the Australian aircraft industry began back in 1935, when Essington Lewis, then general manager of the Broken Hill Proprietary Company, better known by its initialized BHP, partitioned the government to establish a modern aircraft industry. Lewis had spent much of the 1930s traveling the world, including Germany and Japan, and had a keen understanding of the pending threat emerging in these nations. Returning to Australia, he helped establish the Commonwealth Aircraft Corporation, as well as many munitions facilities, meaning Australia was better prepared for industrialization when the war started in 1939. Lewis would later become the Director General of the Department of Munitions during World War II. But also acutely aware of the brewing global tensions, the Australian government, led by Prime Minister Joseph Lyons, took little convincing and helped negotiate the partnership between BHP, General Motors Holden, and Broken Hill, Associated Smelter, to form the Commonwealth Aircraft Corporation, known as the CAC. Later Imperial Chemical Industries, the Orient Steam Navigation Company, and the Electrolytic Zinc Company would join the consortium. But it was with the takeover of Tugan Aircraft Limited on the 19th of June 1936 to secure skills in aeronautical engineering that the CAC gained its general manager, Lawrence Wackett. Wackett cut his teeth on production of the CAC Wirraway, a NA-16 variant made under license from North American Aviation, and was very fortunate to have Fred David on staff. David was a Jewish refugee born Friedrich Wilhelm David, who has a dubious distinction of having worked both for the Axis and Allied powers. Graduating in engineering from the Technical University of Vienna in 1922, he joined the Ernst Heinkel Flugzeugwerke in Warnemünde on the Baltic coast in 1925. After a short stint in America working for a failed startup, he returned to Heinkel in 1930. With restrictions on Jews tightening in Germany, in 1937, Ernst Heinkel made it possible for Friedrich to leave Germany by helping to arrange a position for him as an aircraft design consultant in Japan. For 2 years he worked for Aichi in Nagoya on the Val dive bomber. But with tensions heightening in the build-up to the war, through the Australian trade ambassador in Japan, Friedrich emigrated to Australia in March 1939 and found work at the then recently opened Commonwealth Aircraft Corporation in Fisherman's Bend, Melbourne. By 1940, Fred David was a chief engineer for the CAC, working on the Wacket bomber project. So was the perfect candidate for Wacket to call upon for the emergency Boomerang project. The design and development of the Boomerang was a story of constraints. Given the urgency involved and the materials available, this was not going to be a from-scratch project. The Wirraway provided most of the fuselage, the tail and wings, and the engine from the locally produced Beaufort torpedo bomber became the Boomerang's power plant. A problem arose with part of the proposed armament fit as the planned Hispano-Suiza autocannon wasn't being locally manufactured, but the design team illegally reverse-engineered an example that an Australian airman had souvenired in the Middle East, and these were produced in a CAC workshop. The finalized design showcased a short, stubby fighter with heavy armament, self-sealing tanks, and good pilot armor. An order for 105 aircraft was approved for manufacture before the first prototype was even constructed, making the Boomerang an off-the-drawing-board procurement program. In a testament to the use of existing IP and tooling, it was just 3 months later in May 1942. The prototype CA-12 first flew. The subsequent test series showed no great problems with the design, except for one massive exception. The Boomerang was somewhat underpowered and slow. The new aircraft was tested against a stripped-down F-2A Buffalo, as well as P-40E Kitty Hawk and a P-400 Aerocobra. The Boomerang was faster than the Buffalo but less maneuverable. Against the other fighters it was slower but was described as quite lively, at less than 5,000 feet. Its length was a stubby 25 feet 6 inches, had a height of 9 feet 7 inches, had a wingspan of 36 feet, and a wing area of 225 square feet. Powered by a Pratt & Whitney R1830, twin-wasp 14-cylinder air-cooled radial piston engine outputting 1,200 horsepower. It had a maximum speed of 305 miles per hour at 15,500 feet, a range of 930 miles, a service ceiling of 29,000 feet, and a rate of climb of 2,940 feet per minute. Its armaments included 2 20mm Hispano autocannons and 4 .303 caliber Browning machine guns. The Boomerang included provision for a bomb or smoke markers, but only when its large ventral drop tank was not carried. Despite the augmentation of the US 5th Air Force in the region beginning in March 1942, the Australian government elected to extend the production arrangement for the Boomerang, extending its orders from 105 to 250 aircraft, largely to keep the CAC factory occupied until production of Mustang fighters began. These additional 145 aircraft were manufactured in 4 distinct versions. The CA-13, with 95 built, was a slightly improved version, more distinguished by its contract order number than any improvement. The CA-14 was equipped with a turbo supercharger and was a vast improvement on the original. However, by this time Australia had received a large delivery of the superb Spitfire Mark 8s and was manufacturing the Mustang under license at the CAC. Thus, the CA-14 was never put into production. The last model of the Boomerang to be put into production was the CA-19, a specialized reconnaissance version with a belly camera. 49 CA-19s were completed. By April 1943, the type was operating with RAAF squadrons in the Torres Strait region in air defense roles. A series of interceptions of Japanese bombers occurred during May 1943, but the CA-12 was found to be far too slow to catch up to Japanese Betty bombers and was unable to attack these intruders successfully. Indeed, there is no record of a Boomerang scoring a kill on any enemy aircraft. Not even by Jack Archer, the pilot who caused quite a stir by shooting down a Zero with a CA-9 Wirraway. Thankfully, the importation of the Curtiss P-40 Kitty Hawk and Supermarine Spitfire fighters for the RAAF quickly made the Boomerang obsolete for interceptor fighter duties. Accordingly, the type was removed from air defense duties and sent to Army cooperation squadrons in the Southwest Pacific area of operations. With its rugged construction, armor, and heavy armament, the Boomerang excelled at ground attack. It was able to fly extremely close to targets and was often used to mark targets for larger aircraft, earning it the nickname Smoky Joe. Often operating in pairs, the wingman would observe Japanese ground fire directed at the leader and then bringing the hostile ground troops under strafing attack or drop bombs to counter the ground fire. With the canopy of the Boomerang heavily armored with thick bulletproof glass and the airframe sporting armor plates shielding the bottom of the cockpit area, combined with the robust construction of the airframe and the reliability of the Twin Wasp engine, saw Boomerangs able to absorb a large amount of damage and still safely return to base. Always an endearing feature for pilots. Several RAAF squadrons were equipped with the Boomerang for Army cooperation duties, and the platform saw service over New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, Borneo, and finally during the Bougainville campaign. It was in the Bougainville campaign the Boomerang hit its stride, paired with Royal New Zealand Air Force Corsairs for ground attack sorties. The Boomerangs would observe and mark targets with smoke, and the Corsairs would attack with bombs and rockets. This pairing worked very well indeed and allowed the Boomerang to finish its service with the RAAF on a high note. It's important to remember, though, the CAC Boomerang was an emergency program, and such urgency meant that an inferior design was authorized for manufacture due to the desperation of the times. As an air combat fighter, it was a dismal failure, and one could easily speculate that, had the Boomerang encountered Japanese fighters, it would have suffered the same fate as the despised Brewster Buffalo, being hacked down in large numbers by the contemporary Japanese fighters and suffering total defeat in the air. The Boomerang was quickly withdrawn from Royal Australian Air Force service in 1945, and many surviving aircraft were scrapped at Oakey in Queensland. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment and hit the like button. If you would like to see more like this, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification button.